Sen jälkeen en muista, oliko keskiviikko vai torstai, kun heräsin.
Miten voitte olla varma, että olette syytön, jos ette muista mitään?
There are some cases that remain unsolved because investigators never find enough evidence. And then there are cases like this. Cases where the evidence was there, but somehow slipped through everyone's fingers. Because on June 5th, 1960, beside a quiet lake in Finland, 4 teenagers went camping. By morning, 3 of them would be dead. And the only survivor would spend the next 44 years living beneath a cloud of suspicion. What followed was one of the strangest murder investigations in European history. A crime scene contaminated almost immediately, evidence that disappeared, witness accounts that never fully made sense, a mysterious sketch, an unidentified man photographed at a funeral, and a suspect who wouldn't be arrested until nearly half a century later. And the deeper you follow this rabbit hole, the worse it gets. Lake Bodom sits just outside the Finnish city of Espoo. Today the area looks peaceful, calm water, forest trails, summer cabins, the kind of place people visit to escape the noise of the city. But during the summer of 1960, Lake Bodom became the center of one of Finland's most infamous unsolved murder cases. On June 4th, 4 teenagers decided to spend the evening beside the lake. 15-year-old Mila Bjorklund, 15-year-old Anja Mäki, 18-year-old Seppo Boisman, and 18-year-old Neil Gustafsson. Like countless teenagers before them, they weren't expecting anything unusual. No one was. There was no storm, no emergency, no warning. Just 4 young people spending a summer night together near the water. The group traveled to an area near Oita Manor and pitched a tent close to the shoreline. As evening turned into night, the lake grew quiet. The roads emptied, the forests darkened, and eventually, the teenagers settled into their tent. For decades, investigators would attempt to reconstruct exactly what happened during those final hours. But many details remain unknown. Nobody knows what conversations were shared inside the tent. Nobody knows who fell asleep first. Nobody knows whether they noticed something unusual before the attack began. Because sometime between 4 and 6 o'clock in the morning, everything changed. The attack occurred during a period when nobody nearby appeared to understand what they were witnessing. There was no emergency calls, no immediate witnesses, no surviving account of the assault itself. Only fragments, pieces, moments that investigators would later attempt to stitch together. One of those moments came from a group of bird watchers. Around 6 in the morning, several boys observing birds near the area reportedly noticed something strange. From a distance, they claimed they saw the tent collapse. And shortly afterward, they reportedly saw a blonde man walking away from the scene. And at the time, they had no reason to believe they had just witnessed the aftermath of a triple homicide. The figure disappeared, and the morning continued. Hours later, another man would make a horrifying discovery. A carpenter named Esko Johansson approached the campsite and found the scene. What he saw would become one of the most disturbing crime scenes in Finnish history. 3 teenagers were dead. The tent had been partially collapsed. Blood covered the area, and one victim was still alive. Barely. Neil Gustafsson had survived, but his injuries were severe. His facial bones were fractured. His jaw had been badly damaged. He suffered major trauma to his head and face. According to later reports, he was unconscious when found and required immediate medical treatment. The other 3 victims never had the chance. Seppo, Mila, and Anya had all been killed during the attack. At first glance, it looked like a random act of violence, a brutal attack committed by an unknown person under the cover of darkness. But as investigators began examining the scene, they noticed something strange. And actually, a lot of strange things, because whoever attacked the teenagers hadn't entered the tent. The assault appeared to have happened from the outside, and the deeper police looked into the crime scene, the more disturbing the mystery became. What happened during the early morning hours of June 5, 1960, remains unknown. But investigators believe the attack occurred sometime between 4 and 6 a.m. And based on the physical evidence, the killer may never have entered the tent at all. Instead, investigators concluded that the victims were likely attacked from outside the shelter. The tent itself appeared to have been used almost like a barrier. The killer stabbed through the fabric, struck through the walls, and somehow managed to unleash an extraordinary level of violence without ever stepping inside. The victims suffered both stab wounds and blunt force trauma. Police believed a knife had been used. The second weapon remains unknown. Some investigators suspected a heavy rock or similar object, but no confirmed murder weapon was ever recovered. One victim in particular stood out. Mila Bjorklund suffered the most severe injuries of anyone at the scene. Reports stated she endured significantly more wounds than the others. Some investigators later believed she may have been specifically targeted, though nobody could ever prove why. Meanwhile, Neil Gustafsson somehow survived, and his survival would eventually become one of the most controversial aspects of the entire case. Because despite suffering major facial fractures, he was the only person left alive, the only witness, the only person who might have seen the attacker, and the only person capable of telling investigators what happened. When he eventually recovered enough to speak, he described seeing a dark figure, a man dressed in black, a glimpse of a face, and what he later described as bright red eyes staring back at him. Whether this account reflected reality, trauma, or fragmented memories caused by his injuries would become a matter of debate for decades. Because the more investigators examined the crime scene, the less sense it seemed to make. The killer had vanished, but the strangest part of the mystery was only the beginning. Most unsolved cases stay unsolved because investigators never find enough evidence. The Lake Bodom murders became unsolved for a different reason. Investigators may have lost their best chance at solving the case within the first few hours, because almost immediately after the bodies were discovered, the crime scene became contaminated, and not just slightly, catastrophically. People had already begun moving through the area. Curious onlookers, police officers, volunteers. Some sources even state that soldiers, assisting in a search, walked directly through portions of the crime scene. If that's true, then crucial evidence may have been destroyed before investigators even realized what they were dealing with. Footprints became unreliable, ground impressions were compromised, potential clues disappeared beneath countless new tracks, and unfortunately, that was only the beginning. One of the strangest discoveries involved Neil Gustafsson's shoes, not because they were found, but because of where they were found. The shoes weren't located near the tent. They were discovered hundreds of meters away from the campsite, hidden in the woods. And according to reports, they contained traces of blood. This immediately raised questions. Why would the killer take the shoes? Why carry them such a distance? Why leave them behind? And perhaps most importantly, what happened between the tent and the location where they were recovered? Nobody knew, and nobody would ever find a convincing answer. Then there was the murder weapon, or rather, the lack of one. Despite extensive searches of the area, investigators never recovered the knife believed to have been used in the attack. A second weapon was also suspected due to the blunt force injuries suffered by the victims. That weapon was never found either. 2 murder weapons, gone, without a trace. As the investigation dragged on, the mystery only became more frustrating. Witness accounts were inconsistent, physical evidence was limited, and every new lead seemed to collapse under scrutiny. Years turned into decades. The case became a national obsession in Finland. People debated theories in newspapers. Television programs revisited the murders. Amateur investigators emerged. Everyone wanted answers. Nobody had them, and eventually, police began looking toward a series of unusual suspects, some of whom would become almost legendary within the case itself. When a murder remains unsolved long enough, suspects begin to take on a life of their own. Rumors spread, stories grow. The Lake Bodom murders produced several such aspects, but one name continues to appear more than any other. Hans Assmann. Hans Assmann was a German-born man living in Finland. For years, he existed only on the edge of the investigation, never charged, never officially connected to the murders, yet repeatedly mentioned whenever the case was discussed. Why? Because of a story that refused to die. According to later accounts, a man matching Osmond's description allegedly appeared at a hospital in Helsinki shortly after the murders. Witnesses claimed he was nervous, disheveled, and behaving strangely. Some even alleged he had blood-stained clothing. But there was a problem. Much of this information emerged years after the fact. Documentation was limited, memories conflicted, and investigators never found enough evidence to charge him with anything related to Lake Bodom. To this day, there is no proof that Hans Assmann committed the murders, but his name became permanently attached to the mystery. And then, there was the sketch. For decades, this image has haunted discussions surrounding Lake Bodom. A bald man, deep-set eyes, a severe expression, a face that seemed almost unsettlingly familiar, despite belonging to nobody officially identified. The sketch originated from descriptions associated with the investigation, and over time, it became one of the most recognizable images connected to the case. But what happened next made things even stranger. Years later, researchers examining photographs connected to the victims noticed something unusual. Standing among mourners at a funeral was a man. A man some people believed resembled the sketch. Not perfectly, but enough to raise eyebrows. Who was he? Nobody knows. Was he connected to the murders? Nobody knows. Was it merely a coincidence? Again, nobody knows. The photograph became one of the most enduring mysteries surrounding the case, not because it proved anything, but because it didn't. It was another question added to a case already overflowing with them. Over the years, other names surfaced. A local kiosk owner, a former military man, various drifters and known criminals, yet every lead eventually suffered the same fate. No evidence, no arrest, no answers. The case seemed destined to remain unsolved forever, until 2004. When investigators shocked Finland by arresting the one person nobody expected, the survivor. After 44 years, police believed they finally knew who the killer was. And according to them, he had been at the scene all along. For more than 4 decades, Neil Gustafsson was known as the sole survivor of the Lake Bodom murders. The young man who had somehow lived through an attack that killed 3 of his friends, the witness, the victim, the survivor. But in 2004, everything changed. Because after 44 years, Finnish authorities announced they believed they had finally solved the case. And according to investigators, the killer had been hiding in plain sight the entire time. His name was Neil Gustafsson. The prosecution's theory was shocking. Investigators argued that the murders had not been committed by an unknown stranger. Instead, they claimed an argument had occurred among the group during that night. According to their theory, Neil became enraged, attacked the others, killed 3 of his friends, then staged the scene to make himself appear to be a victim. For decades, this possibility had lingered in the background, but now authorities were publicly accusing him of one of Finland's most infamous crimes. The announcement stunned the country. Investigators pointed to several details: the location of Neil's shoes, forensic interpretations, and various inconsistencies they believed existed within earlier accounts. The prosecution argued that his injuries could have occurred during the struggle, and they claimed the evidence supported their theory. But there was a problem. And actually, there were several. The defense immediately attacked the case. They pointed to the severe injuries Neil had suffered: broken facial bones, serious trauma, injuries that many believed would be extremely difficult to self-inflict. Then there was the issue of the crime scene itself. The contaminated evidence, the missing murder weapons, the decades that had passed, the countless opportunities for mistakes. And perhaps most importantly, there was no direct proof linking Neil to the murders. No confession, no weapon, no definitive piece of evidence. Only theories. The trial quickly became one of the most closely watched legal proceedings in Finland. For the first time in decades, People believed the mystery might finally be solved. Maybe there would be answers. Maybe there would be closure. Maybe after 44 long years, someone would finally be held accountable. But that's not what happened. In October 2005, Neil Gustafsson was acquitted. The court ruled that the evidence presented by prosecutors was insufficient. The case against him collapsed. And just like that, Finland's most infamous murder mystery returned to where it had started. Unsolved. Today, Lake Bodom looks peaceful. People fish there, families visit, children play near the shoreline. Most visitors would never imagine that one of the country's most disturbing mysteries unfolded beside these waters. Yet beneath the calm surface, the questions remain. Who attacked the teenagers that night? Why were they targeted? What happened to the murder weapons? Who was the man in the sketch? Who was the man standing in the funeral photograph? And if Neil Gustafsson wasn't responsible, then who was? More than 60 years have passed since the attack. Witnesses have died. Evidence has disappeared. Memories have faded. And with each passing year, the chances of finding the truth become smaller. Yet the mystery refuses to die. Because unlike most cold cases, Lake Bodom never stopped producing questions. Every answer seemed to create another mystery. Every aspect led nowhere. Every theory eventually collapsed. Perhaps that's why the case still fascinates people today. Not because of what we know, but because of what we don't. Somewhere between the facts, the rumors, the mistakes, and the decades of speculation, the truth vanished. And unless something extraordinary happens, it may remain lost forever.